The Select Subcommittee will please come to order. Quorum is present. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, the Chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays may be ordered. The subcommittee will use the electronic system for recorded votes on amendments and passage of the report. Of course, should any technical issues arise, which I do not anticipate, we will immediately transition to traditional roll call votes. Any procedural or motion-related votes during today's markup will be dispensed with by a traditional roll call vote. Now, pursuant to notice, I call up a report titled, After Action Review of the COVID-19 Pandemic, Lessons Learned and a Path Forward. The clerk will report the report, which has been distributed in advance.
A report titled, After Action Review of the COVID-19 Pandemic, the Lessons Learned and a Path Forward.
I ask unanimous consent that the report be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The Chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, and the clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to the report offered by Dr. Wenstrup.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the report. And before I get started, I'd like to introduce some articles for the record that are exemplary of the Select Subcommittee's finding that a lab leak is the most likely origin scenario, that the Chinese Communist Party was conducting dangerous research, and this type of dangerous research was notionally supported by the NIH. I ask unanimous consent for a 2005 statement from the State Department that says China has a bioweapons program. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent for a 2015 article by Dr. Ralph Barrick and Dr. Zhengli Shi of China, where they created a chimera of 2 bat-borne coronaviruses that gained function. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent for a 2017 article by the Wuhan Institute of Virology researcher Dr. Ben Hu, where he created multiple chimeras of coronaviruses under a BSL-2 condition at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent for a 2011 article by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins that stated, important information and insights can come from generating a potentially dangerous virus in the laboratory. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent for a 2012 paper written by Dr. Fauci that stated that the benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the risks. Without objection, so ordered. But I want to thank all of those that voluntarily presented to the committee to give honest and forthright testimony. The report is the culmination of years of work and dedication. The Select Subcommittee held bad actors accountable, drove actual change in our public health agencies, and provided a roadmap for what to do and what not to do. I could go on and on about the findings of this report, but I think we'll let the 500 pages and 2,000 footnotes speak for themselves. Today, we're also releasing all previously unreleased interview transcripts and supplementary materials. We as a subcommittee are also grateful to whistleblowers that courageously came forward and through long hours and dedication provided important evidence that we may not have found. I want to thank the hard work of the professional staffers on this subcommittee, and I feel that that's a must. Our staff was an extraordinary group of hardworking patriots seeking to fight for, and this is my favorite Superman motto, truth, justice, and the American way. I want to thank my staff, Staff Director Mitch Benzine, Chief Counsel Eric Osherhughes, Senior Counsel Jack Emmer, Counsel Madeline Brewer, Professional Staff Member Peter Spector, Professional Staff Member Anna Blake Langley, Communications Director Liz Lyons, Press Secretary Olivia Coleman, and Director of Operations and Member Services Marie Policastro. In one scenario, years from now, people perhaps will have long forgotten what we did here. But if our work leads to a trustable system that is able to complete our goals of predicting, preparing, protecting us, and preventing the next pandemic. To me, that's reward enough. May God be with us and our future generations of Americans. I now recognize the ranking member for a 5-minute statement on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to begin by entering into the record a number of letters and materials the Select Subcommittee has received in recent days from parties to investigations this Congress, including from Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Francis Collins, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the American Federation of Teachers. These submissions memorialize substantive objections these parties have to the representations made in the majority's report, and I believe it is important that the record reflect their perspectives as well.
Without objection.
Thank you. Look, it goes without saying that both sides of the aisle have not always seen eye to eye in the Select Subcommittee this Congress, and it is clear from our 2 final reports that as the Select Subcommittee concludes, we are leaving with different impressions of what we did or did not find. At various points, we've debated these issues, and I think the record is clear on where we all stand. So as we wrap up these 2 years, I want to say a few final things. First, I want to acknowledge the devastating loss of life that COVID-19 pandemic inflicted on families and communities across this country. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives too soon. And while we have overcome the darkest days of the COVID-19 pandemic, I recognize that as a nation, we may never fully overcome this grief that all of us share, regardless of political party. It's always important to put humanity front and center and to reflect on the human loss and the human struggle that went through all of this pandemic. And oftentimes in politics and partisan war, there's a sense of forgetfulness of what people have faced and what truly is important for them. Second, I want to thank the hundreds of thousands of doctors, nurses, first responders, healthcare workers, essential workers, scientists, business leaders, policymakers, moms and dads, and people who came together to mount America's response to the most significant public health crisis we have faced in a generation. Often, at great personal expense and sacrifice, millions of Americans put their neighbors before themselves to help ensure that we could make it through this challenging period. It is this selflessness that represents the best of what America has to offer, and it is this selflessness that gives me hope that despite our differences, we can find a path forward to safeguarding and strengthening our nation's public health. Now, I won't pretend that this process won't be messy at times, but it is my sincere belief that we can come together as true professionals to work through the noise of politics and partisanship, to do the real work of preventing and preparing for future pandemics, closing pathways for novel viruses to emerge, be they in nature or in a lab, strengthening our schools so that they can be better prepared to maintain safe in-person learning during future pandemics, fortifying infection prevention and control in nursing homes to keep our seniors safe, exploring how we can lay the groundwork for the rapid development of future vaccines and therapeutics for novel viruses when they inevitably emerge, and more. And in my opinion, we didn't do enough of that this Congress, and I consider that a missed opportunity. But as I said at our final hearing last month, just because we haven't yet come together to tackle these serious challenges doesn't mean we can't. And as I've said since the outset of the Congress, I'm willing to work with anyone, Republican or Democrat, to move this work forward. So as we conclude the Select Subcommittee today, it is my hope that we can set aside the politics and commit to the forward-looking mission of meaningfully getting ahead of future viruses. Because even after 2 years, I still believe that it's not too late to come together and do the work of saving future lives. And I truly appreciate all the members being in the arena and debating and having good conversations of what we believe through practical scientific principles or whether it's philosophical or ideological ways, all of those were valid concerns, and we came out better for it as individuals. I want to thank the members in the Democratic Committee who showed up consistently and gave it their all, and were very well prepared for all of these meetings. I want to thank our wonderful staff under the leadership of Miles Lichtman, Joseph Romero, Danny Walker, and Alicia Yass, who have done excellent jobs while being here. And I also want to personally thank the Chairman Westrump, for your service in the military, for your service in Congress, and for carrying this messy process forward to the best of your ability. I respect that. I respect you, and I thank you for your years of friendship and of service. And I congratulate you on your retirement, and wish you nothing but the best for you and your family. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the report. All those in favor signify by saying yea. Yea.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to the report is agreed to. The question is now on favorably reporting the report as amended. All those in favor signify by saying yea. Yea. All those opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Pursuant to the vote, the Select Subcommittee hereby adopts this report titled After Action Review of the COVID-19 Pandemic, the Lessons Learned and Path Forward. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Finally, I want to ask unanimous consent for the recommendations that accompany the report to be entered into the record. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you all. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, Select Subcommittee members shall have the right to file with the clerk of the Select Subcommittee supplemental, additional, minority, and dissenting views within 2 days. Without objection, so ordered. Additionally, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the report reported today, subject to the approval of the minority. Without objection, so ordered. There's been a lot of hard work from both sides of the aisle through this whole process. I'm grateful to everyone for their efforts, and I'm pleased that we have come to this day and be able to put something forward for the American people to digest and move from. If there's not further business for the Select Subcommittee, without objection and for the final time, the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic stands adjourned.
Congress's Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic is out with its final report. The 557-page document titled After Action Review of the COVID-19 Pandemic, the Lessons Learned and a Path Forward has determined that a lab-related incident involving dangerous gain-of-function research in China is the most likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. Per the subcommittee, the 5 strongest arguments in favor of the lab leak theory include: 1, the virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not likely to be found in nature. 2, data shows that all COVID-19 cases stemming from a single introduction into humans. This runs contrary to previous pandemics where there were, in fact, multiple spillover events. 3rd, Wuhan is home to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has a history of conducting gain-of-function research at inadequate biosafety levels. 4, Wuhan Institute of Virology researchers were sick with a COVID-like virus in the fall of 2019, months before COVID-19 was discovered at the wet market. And 5, by nearly all measures of science, if there was evidence of a natural origin, it would have already surfaced.
The findings state that EcoHealth Alliance nonprofit used American taxpayer dollars to facilitate gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, And the proximal origin publication, which was used to discredit the lab leak theory, was prompted by Dr. Anthony Fauci to push the preferred narrative that COVID-19 originated in nature. The report also states that more than 160,000 businesses closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with 60% of those closures classified as permanent. Unemployment rates surged to levels not seen since the Great Depression, and children experienced historic learning loss, higher rates of psychological distress, and decreased physical well-being due to school closures.
Reactions on X are pouring in, and some people are less than pleased, saying the report does not go far enough. Media pundit Jeff Carlson posted, "This report reads like a whitewash of Fauci, NIH, and the rest of our government, pinning most of the blame onto EcoHealth. Federal government was deeply involved in funding gain-of-function. Day-6 EcoHealth was simply the mechanism. We needed true accounting." Other users wrote, "When do the prosecutions start? The 4 years of trauma, 4 nasty cases of COVID-19, and damages accumulated by it. Nowhere is it expressly stated who will be held accountable for anything. None of this will matter unless actual humans are held accountable. With financial loss and imprisonment, Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic should be ashamed. Final report? This should just be the beginning." And I do appreciate the conclusions the report draws in terms of strengthening, bolstering the idea that this did in fact come from the lab, and pointing out to the numerous failures, the irresponsible behavior of EcoHealth Alliance. I agree that our own governments, our own agency, NIH, Fauci himself, have not properly been held accountable for greenlighting this funding. And I am increasingly sick of reports about reports about reports. I want to see the raw intelligence, and this is something I hope Kash Patel does when he gets into the FBI, because the FBI is one of 2 federal agencies, along with the Energy Department, that did conclude a lab origin was more likely than natural animal stuff. Natural animal stuff, that's the scientific term.
Yes, the wet markets.
They said that it was a lab leak based on some information they have. And the smoking gun, the strongest evidence would be that the scientists sick at the lab. If scientists are sick at the lab before the wet market happened, and they're sick at the lab with something resembling COVID, it's open and shut. It's done. That solves the issue. That's the smoking gun. And we have heard that the Wall Street Journal has reported that that was the case. Other independent journalists have reported that that's the case. But I would like to see the raw intelligence that that is the case. That is what I presume the FBI has, and the Energy Department, and maybe that this select subcommittee was able to see. But I'm sick of just hearing that asserted. I want to see the evidence that they have for that. And then it's done, and then we know it for sure. And we deserve to know it for sure, because it has to do with what we fund and where the culpability is. This is a pandemic that killed however many millions of people globally. And if it was truly caused because we funded some really risky research in a foreign laboratory, and then China covered it up, and we just said, oh yeah, stop eating pangolins, that would be bad, when it was really our research, that is a damning indictment.
It would be. I would love to see that intel as well. It's so hard for, all of us, we're interpreting this information,
Yeah.
we're seeing reports of the reports. Like
we don't know for sure right now. That's still the case. We don't know for sure.
The language used in this report was likely, and I will say personally, from the beginning of the pandemic, I was asking questions about the origin story that we were told. The math was not adding up for me because of this Wuhan lab that was there, that was doing the exact kind of research, the gain-of-function research where you're mutating these viruses in pretty extreme ways that ultimately have quite a resemblance to the actual COVID virus that we were dealing with. It's okay to ask those questions. And I think part of the problem, my biggest critique of the media I had at that time, was they said, if you raise those questions, you're being a conspiracy theorist. No, those were reasonable questions to be asking. And I think with a report like this, it gives more fuel to the idea that those were reasonable questions. Again, the word used is likely. So again, we have to take that with a grain of salt. The other thing just to note is that the select committee was appointed by, controlled by Republicans, so that you have to take that into account as well. But I just think it's a reasonable conversation to have. And then the other thing is that we need to better understand the U.S. involvement in this lab. What is the funding potential nonprofit groups are U.S.-based, also involved in funding that. We deserve to know because millions of people died, hundreds of billions of dollars lost, and there needs to be accountability. And that's one part of the report I do agree with.
Yes, so we hope that Jay Bhattacharya, who is being brought in to run the agency, I have a lot of confidence in him. He was a contrarian voice for a lot of the pandemic measures taken, and so I hope we can get truth and accountability and make sure something like this never happens again. And that is the fear, is that there was an effort to shift blame from the lab leak idea to something else so that the researchers who approved this kind of research not only will be shielded from accountability, but will be able to keep doing this exact thing. I mean, Dr. Fauci is the foremost advocate of this gain-of-function research. Even during when President Obama became very skeptical of this research and put a pause on funding for it. But there was an exceptions mechanism where Dr. Fauci was the one approving exceptions so that the experiments could still continue. The political process tried to put a constraint on this type of experimentation, and the permanent federal health bureaucracy said, that's nice. We're going to keep doing it, though. We think it's important. We think it's good. This is how we want to spend our money. And that's what so worries me. When the politically selected person, our president, says, no, stop doing this. And they do it anyway because, well, we know better than you. It's not a Republicans versus health thing. This was a Democrat who decided this. This was Obama. And it still went on. So that's the kind of accountability we want to bring to make sure that that doesn't happen. And again, if it is, I'm no investment in how COVID started. If it was animals, it was animals. And I don't think the wet markets sound like a healthy, good idea either. Both things deserve some kind of correction. But never forget that you were demonized as a racist for thinking the lab leak was a possibility, when it is by far the other explanation that is more like racially, and it's just whatever the truth is the truth.
Yeah.
But that has to do with specific Chinese cultural practices, whereas the lab explanation is not a racist explanation. It's the U.S. government and the Chinese government was the failure there. They would, of course, rather it be it's on the people because they just can't stop eating bats or whatever, when it could have been the scientists themselves.
The only quick thing I'll add is that it's going to be fascinating when RFK Jr., who wrote the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, that goes into a lot of this material we're discussing, might be the HHS secretary, will have influence over NIH. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
Yes, it will. All right, up next, some conservatives are actually angry, I'm one of them, about Trump's pick to lead the DEA. We're going to tell you why. You will probably be outraged as well. Stay tuned.
Robert Redfield is here. You remember him very well, of course. He led us during the CDC. Where COVID came from matters, okay? And it's been a point of concern. Congress was looking at it. They released their report. It's 550-something pages. There's all kinds of stuff in there. Gripes about my brother for like 50 pages. But on the question specifically, Doctor, about where it came from, they say it came from a lab leak, not a wet market, but they don't overwhelm us with proof that they know that. They're more interested in the fact that they think Fauci didn't want that to be the case. What do you think of the report, and why does it matter?
Well, I think Congressman Weintraub and his committee did a good job, and I do think that was one of the first conclusions, that the bulk of the evidence that they have is that it originated from the lab and not natural spillover. And I will say, Chris, we don't have a lot of time. There really is a lot of evidence to support that conclusion. But most of the evidence, and I think we'll see it soon, is really the intelligence. I said this, probably 2 years ago, that this will not be solved by science. This will be solved by the intelligence community. I think we can anticipate, hopefully in the next several months, that there'll be a revision of the intelligence community's assessments. We have both the FBI and the Energy Department who've concluded with their scientists that this has come from the Wuhan lab, and we have a number of the others that either said it maybe came from nature with low confidence, or they make no comment. They don't go either way. I think you're going to see a revision of the intelligence communities, and I think there'll be consensus that they all are going to come to the same conclusion that the Congress did in this House report, that the bulk of the evidence is that this originated from a lab. I don't think,
And then what should we do about
part
it?
of the reasons that some of the scientists have not been as forthright in this regard, and maybe why I've been fingered by some of them, is that they don't want the federal government regulating science. I happen to be one who feel we should have a moratorium on gain-of-function research and then decide some regulations, if we're going to do this research, how to do it in a safe, responsible, effective way. And I think that's the real issue here. But I think if you read the report, and there are a lot of things there in the report about the virology, looking at some of the aspects of this virus's sequences that just aren't natural. And again, if we have more time, at some time, I'm happy to go through with why myself, as a clinical virologist, came to the conclusion that this is a virus that originated in biomedical research.
Let's do it tomorrow. You available, Bob?
Sure, I am. Yeah.
Because
Happy to-
I believe what I've learned from you and others, that this virus was made. I have long COVID, as you know. You've helped me. Others have helped me. I think it was made to mess us up as bad as it can. And I think somebody made it do that. And I'll bring you back on tomorrow night. We'll keep the conversation going, okay?
God bless, Chris. Thanks for having me. All right.
All right. Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
Welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be cracking open a pretty massive report.
Oh, yeah.
520 pages.
Wow.
It's a congressional report titled 12.04.2024 SSCP Final Report.pdf.
Okay.
And it's basically a deep dive into the U.S. pandemic response.
All right.
We're going to be talking about everything.
Oh, wow.
From the origins of the virus to masks and lockdowns,
Okay.
vaccines, economic fallout, all that.
The whole 9 yards?
Yeah, the whole thing.
All right.
So this isn't just like a summary of events. This
Right.
is an actual congressional investigation, which
Mhm.
means
Yeah.
it's looking at the controversies,
Mhm.
the conflicting viewpoints,
Yeah.
really trying to get down to like the tough questions about how things were handled.
Sounds like it.
So consider this your shortcut
Okay.
to understanding all the key takeaways and controversies
Yeah.
without having to read all 520 pages yourself.
I like it.
So one of the things that we found super interesting right off the bat
Yeah.
was
What's that?
the stuff about the origins of the virus.
Okay.
And this is something that I know you followed pretty closely.
I did. Yeah.
You know, remember that scientific paper, Proximal Origin?
Oh, yeah.
The one that everyone cited as like the reason to dismiss the lab leak theory?
The one that like basically shut down the conversation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what's crazy is this report reveals that Dr. Fauci himself
What?
actually prompted that paper
No way.
to try and disprove the lab leak theory.
Oh, wow.
Pretty ironic, right?
That's wild.
Like you're trying to shut down the idea of a lab leak
Yeah.
by writing a paper disproving the lab leak.
Right.
And that's the paper that everyone uses to say it wasn't a lab leak.
It does raise some questions about the scientific process there, for sure.
Yeah, and you know,
Yeah.
the report also highlights that the Defense Intelligence Agency,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
DIA,
Okay.
they actually criticized Proximal Origin
Mm-hmm.
in their own analysis. They pointed out all these weaknesses in the paper's arguments
Uh-huh.
and said that even the authors of Proximal Origin admitted that a lab origin was possible.
So they're like, even the authors were like, well, it's possible.
Yeah, like it's not impossible,
Right.
but we're just going to say it wasn't.
Interesting.
So hold on. So the DIA,
Yeah.
a major intelligence agency,
Yeah.
is raising red flags about this paper
Yeah.
that's being used to shut down the lab leak theory.
It definitely seems like there was this attempt to control the narrative
Mm-hmm.
and suppress alternative viewpoints, even if they were backed by evidence.
And that's something that you see throughout the report.
It's like a theme.
Yeah, it keeps coming up over and over again.
Yeah.
So how does EcoHealth Alliance fit in all this?
Okay.
Because I know they were mentioned a lot.
They were everywhere.
but I'm still not clear on like exactly what they were doing.
Well, so EcoHealth Alliance was doing bat coronavirus research
Okay.
at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and their work is a big part of this whole debate about where the virus came from.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Their funding proposal
Yeah.
was actually rejected
By who?
by DARPA,
DARPA.
the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency,
And why was it rejected?
because they said it lacked gain of function or DURC plans.
Okay.
Hold on, I know that's a lot of jargon.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm a little lost.
So DURC plans are basically safety protocols
Okay.
for when you're working with really dangerous pathogens.
Oh, so like,
They're supposed to minimize the risk of accidentally releasing the virus
God.
while misusing it.
So they're saying this research is too risky
Right.
without these extra safety measures in place.
Exactly.
But Dr. Daszak, the head of EcoHealth Alliance,
Yeah.
he claims that they did have DURC plans,
Hmm.
even though the report says they didn't.
So we have conflicting accounts here.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder who's telling the truth.
And what else might be hidden?
Right. Transparency is key. And to make it even more complicated,
Yeah.
the report details how the Trump administration actually terminated the EcoHealth grant,
Oh, wow.
but then
Or-
the NIH under the Biden administration reinstated it.
So it was cut off and then brought back.
Exactly.
I mean, that seems like a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal.
And the report is saying, we don't know why.
Right.
Like, why was it cut off in the first place?
Yeah.
And why was it brought back?
Exactly. There's a lack of clarity around this whole decision.
So it sounds like this whole origins debate
Yeah,
is far from settled.
it really is.
And there are a lot of unanswered questions
Absolutely.
about transparency
Yes.
and potential conflicts of interest.
Definitely. It seems like there was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
And maybe some things that weren't handled in the most transparent way.
And this potential for bias in scientific discourse
Yeah.
isn't just limited to the origins debate.
Right.
The report highlights similar concerns when examining other pandemic policies like masking and lockdowns.
Okay. Interesting.
So they found that Cochrane Collaboration,
Yeah.
which is a very well-respected source
Yeah, I've heard of them.
for evidence-based healthcare,
They're reliable?
they found that there's no clear evidence that masks actually reduce respiratory viral infections.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So all those mask mandates
Yeah.
might not have actually been based on solid science.
That's what the report's saying.
I mean, I remember all that debate about whether the CDC was following the science on masking.
Right.
And the report says that when they questioned Dr. Fauci about it,
Yeah.
he couldn't cite any placebo-controlled studies to support those mandates.
It seems like a pattern,
What do you mean?
like promoting certain narratives
Yeah.
without necessarily having the evidence to back them up.
You're picking up on a key theme here.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that maybe things weren't as clear-cut as they were presented,
Right.
and that maybe some voices were silenced or ignored.
And this brings us to the potential harms of these policies.
Okay.
So the report goes into the possible downsides of masking young children, especially when it comes to language development.
Oh, right.
They found studies that show these concerns,
Uh-huh.
but it seems like they were largely ignored.
So they're saying maybe we didn't fully consider all the risks and benefits.
Yeah, like were the downsides,
Yeah.
especially for vulnerable populations like children,
Right.
overlooked.
It's a good question.
And the same concern
Yeah.
about unintended consequences
Mm-hmm.
applies to lockdowns as well.
Of course.
The report doesn't hold back,
Okay.
describing the economic and mental health impacts
Yeah.
of those
Well,
measures.
Right. I remember that being a big topic of discussion.
Yeah.
The whole economic and mental health struggles during lockdown.
So what did they actually find?
Well, they cited a study
Yeah.
published in Nature,
Okay.
which is a top scientific journal,
Yeah.
and they found a 22% increase
Wow.
in mental health disorders
That's huge.
between 2019 and 2020.
That is a massive jump.
It is.
And it really shows the cost of lockdowns.
Yeah, the social and psychological costs.
And you wonder if anyone thought about
Yeah.
those long-term consequences.
Right, like did anyone stop and say, hey, what about the mental health effects of all this?
Yeah, exactly.
It's important to consider the whole picture.
And the report also highlights the issue of excess deaths
Oh, wow.
from causes other than COVID-19,
Okay.
particularly among younger Americans.
So like collateral damage from the pandemic response.
And they're saying that these collateral damages
Yeah.
were largely overlooked
Wow.
because everyone was focused on the virus itself.
It's like they had blinders on,
Yeah.
focused on one thing and ignoring everything else.
So it seems like the single-minded focus on the virus might have led to some neglect
Yeah,
of other important health issues
right.
and unintended consequences.
Exactly.
And if we connect that back to what we talked about with the origins debate,
Yeah. It seems like there's a broader pattern here
what is it?
of emphasizing a single narrative
Uh-huh.
while downplaying or ignoring
Yeah.
alternative viewpoints
Okay.
and potential harm.
Like they were so focused on one path
Yeah.
that they didn't even consider other possibilities.
What could go wrong?
Right. And that can be really dangerous. It
Yeah.
makes you think like, were we really prepared for something like this?
Yeah.
Did we have the right systems in place?
Right?
Were our decisions based on like, a full understanding of the risks and benefits?
I mean, this report kind of suggests that maybe we weren't.
Yeah, it seems like there were some gaps
Yeah.
in our preparedness and in our decision making.
And speaking of potentially flawed responses,
Okay.
the report really digs into the government's handling of vaccines,
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
which was, of course, a major focal point throughout the pandemic.
Absolutely.
And it's important to clarify here,
Yeah.
we're not debating the science of vaccines themselves.
Right.
We're looking at the decisions.
Surrounding their rollout
Okay.
and the potential missteps
Got it.
along the way.
So, like, how things were handled,
Yeah, exactly.
not necessarily the vaccines themselves.
Right.
They-
So one of the most surprising findings
Yeah.
was that President Biden
Okay.
was publicly promising booster shots for all Americans
Really?
before the FDA
Wow.
or the CDC
Okay.
had even issued official recommendations.
So he was getting ahead of the science.
It seems like the political considerations
Yeah.
might have outpaced the scientific process in that case.
Interesting.
And it makes you wonder
Yeah.
if the focus was really on public health.
Right. Like, was it more about politics than science?
Exactly.
Mm.
And then the report goes on to talk about
Okay.
these two FDA scientists,
Okay.
Drs. Gruber and Krauss,
All right.
who raised concerns
About what?
about the accelerated booster approval process.
Mm.
They were basically saying
Yeah.
that the data didn't support boosters for everyone,
Mm.
and they were basically sidelined
Wow.
for voicing their dissenting opinions.
So they got punished for speaking up?
It seems that way.
That's concerning.
Yeah, it really makes you think about
Yeah.
what was going on inside the FDA.
Right. Like, how was dissent handled?
Yeah, was there pressure to conform,
To a certain narrative?
even if the evidence wasn't really there?
Exactly. It makes you question the whole process.
The report also criticizes Dr. Woodcock,
Okay.
who was the head of the FDA at the time,
Right.
for claiming she couldn't recall any discussions about vaccine mandates,
Hmm.
even though there's like documented evidence to the contrary.
So she's saying she doesn't remember,
Yeah, basically.
but there's proof that these discussions happened.
Yeah, emails, meeting minutes, things like that.
Wow, that's a pretty big discrepancy
It is, and it really undermines trust
in the FDA.
in the whole system,
Yeah, if they're not being transparent,
right?
how can we trust their decisions?
And speaking of questionable decisions,
Yeah.
the report also looks at the FDA's handling of ivermectin.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Remember that whole campaign
Yeah.
to discourage its use?
Right, they were saying it was only for animals.
Yeah, that infamous tweet.
You are not a horse. You are not a cow.
Come on!
Yeah, it was pretty condescending.
And the report is saying
Yeah.
that was misleading
Okay.
because ivermectin does have approved human uses.
Right, it's not just for livestock.
So they're criticizing the FDA
Mm-hmm.
for dismissing a potential treatment
Okay.
without thoroughly investigating it.
It seems like they were quick to shut down any alternatives
Yeah.
that didn't fit their narrative.
And this tendency to favor a single narrative
yeah.
seems to have extended to vaccine mandates as well.
Interesting.
The report argues that the mandates ignored national immunity
Okay.
and that there wasn't really clear evidence
Yeah.
that vaccines actually prevented transmission.
Which was their main justification for the mandates.
Exactly.
So they're saying the mandates might have gone too far.
You know,
Yeah.
like maybe they infringed on individual rights.
And that doctor-patient relationship.
Right. Like, shouldn't those decisions be made between a patient and their doctor?
Yeah.
That's what the report is arguing.
It's a tough balance, though.
What do you mean?
Like balancing individual liberties with public health.
Right.
It's not an easy question to answer.
And to show the human cost?
Of the mandates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The report shares the story of Allison Williams.
Who was that?
She's a pregnant woman
Okay.
who lost her job for refusing the vaccine.
Oh, wow.
And it really reminds you
Yeah.
that behind all these policy debates, are real people
Right.
whose lives were affected.
It's easy to forget that sometimes.
Yeah, we get caught up in the big picture.
Yeah.
But these are real people with real stories.
Absolutely.
The report also delves into the issue of vaccine injuries,
Okay.
which are rare,
Right.
but they do happen.
Yeah.
And it seems like the system for compensating people for vaccine injuries was totally overwhelmed.
So the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program
Right.
had a massive backlog of cases.
Wow. So people who were injured
Yeah.
were having trouble getting compensated.
And what's even more concerning
Yeah.
is that Dr. Woodcock herself
Okay.
admitted that there were uncommon but serious reactions.
To the vaccines
Yeah.
that weren't officially recognized.
Exactly.
So they knew there were more side effects
Yeah, but they weren't necessarily tracking them.
or acknowledging them.
Right, and the report is saying that those existing safety systems
Yeah.
might have been missing some important signals,
Okay.
especially when it came to neurological conditions.
So there could be more problems
Yeah, potentially.
than we realize.
And this raises questions about
Yeah.
whether we're doing enough to monitor vaccine safety,
Especially with new vaccines.
especially the when they're rolled out so quickly.
Right, like under emergency use authorization.
Exactly.
It seems like there are a lot of unanswered questions here.
Yeah, and this really gets to a broader theme that the report identifies
What's that?
government overreach
Oh, interesting.
and its impact on the doctor-patient relationship.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So the report is basically saying
Yeah.
that these healthcare decisions, especially something as personal as vaccination,
Right.
should be made between individuals and their doctors,
Yeah.
not dictated by the government.
I can see both sides of that argument.
And they used Chairman Winstrup's experience as an example.
Okay, what happened?
So he couldn't get a COVID test,
Really?
even though his doctor recommended it,
Why not?
because he wasn't showing symptoms,
So the government policy
Yeah.
was preventing him from getting a test.
even though his doctor thought he needed one.
That's a good example of a one-size-fits-all policy.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for everyone.
And the report also presents the testimony of Dr. Jerry Williams,
Okay.
who's a child neurologist.
Right.
And he talked about the difficulties he faced in getting off-label drugs, like hydroxychloroquine,
Okay.
for his patients.
And why was that a problem?
He said there was government pressure on pharmacies. That made it really hard,
To get these medications.
even when he thought they were in his patient's best interest.
So the government was interfering
Yeah.
with his ability to treat his patients.
Exactly.
That's a pretty serious accusation
It is. And it raises concerns about
Yeah.
how much power the government should have
in these situations.
in healthcare decisions.
It's a slippery slope.
So let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about the economic fallout.
From the pandemic response.
Yeah, this is a huge issue.
Absolutely. It's going to have long-term consequences.
And the report doesn't shy away from it.
Okay.
They look at how the response,
Yeah.
particularly the lockdowns and business closures,
Right.
really hurt.
In certain communities.
Yeah, rural and low-income communities.
Okay.
So these communities
Wait.
were already facing economic challenges
Right.
before the pandemic even hit. And then the lockdowns and job losses just made things so much worse.
It's like the pandemic response
Yeah.
exposed all these pre-existing problems in our society.
And magnified them.
Right.
The economic disparities,
Mm.
healthcare inequities,
Yeah.
educational gaps.
It's like it exacerbated everything.
Yeah. And then there's the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
The report argues that their actions,
Yeah.
while they were intended to help,
Right.
actually fueled inflation
Mm.
and ended up benefiting the wealthy
Okay.
at the expense of lower income earners.
So the rich got richer.
And the poor got poorer.
Yeah, essentially.
So the report gets into this whole argument
Okay.
that the Fed's policies,
Mm-hmm.
like pumping all this money into the economy,
Right.
led to rising prices,
And inflation hurts everyone
but it hurts low-income earners the most.
because they have less cushion
Exactly.
to absorb those price increases.
It's like these policies
Yeah.
had these unintended consequences.
Right, they were trying to help,
Yeah.
but they might have actually made things worse for some people.
To make matters even worse,
Yeah.
the report also looks at the Paycheck Protection Program
Okay.
and the Employee Retention Credit.
Those were the big relief programs.
Right. And they found significant levels of waste, fraud, and abuse
Oh, wow.
associated with those programs.
So even the programs designed to help
Right.
were riddled with problems.
It seems like a pattern of good intentions gone wrong.
Yeah, like they were trying to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
but things just didn't go as planned.
And speaking of patterns,
Okay.
there's one more major issue.
Yeah.
that this report brings up.
What's that?
A lack of transparency
Oh, wow.
throughout the entire pandemic response.
Transparency is so important,
It is.
especially in a crisis.
Because without it,
Yeah,
trust erodes.
right.
And this report is very critical
Of who?
of the Department of Health and Human Services.
HHS?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're saying that HHS was not cooperative and that they deliberately obfuscated evidence.
So they were hiding information.
It seems like it.
That's not good.
One example that really stood out to me
Yeah.
was the fact that HHS redacted more information
Okay.
in the documents they provided to Congress
Mm-hmm.
than they did to a FOIA requester.
Hold on. What's a FOIA requester?
So FOIA stands for the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay.
It's a law
Yeah.
that lets anyone request access to government documents.
Got it.
So a FOIA requester
Yeah.
is just someone who filed a request under that act.
Okay, so anyone can file a FOIA request.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So HHS was more transparent
Wow.
with a random person
Yeah.
than they were with Congress.
That's bizarre.
It is.
And it suggests they were trying to hide something.
Yeah, like why wouldn't they just be transparent?
Right. What are they so afraid of?
And the report also details
Yeah.
attempts to restrict the testimony of Dr. Morenz,
Who's
a
that?
senior NIH official.
Okay.
And they found out that he was using personal email
Oh, no.
to avoid FOIA requests.
So he was trying to circumvent the system.
That's what it looks like.
Wow, that's pretty shady.
It is.
Yeah.
And the report concludes this section
Okay.
by calling for greater accountability
Yeah.
and transparency.
From HHS.
Yes, specifically from HHS.
It seems like they were really not happy with HHS.
No, they were not.
And they're basically saying
Yeah,
that the public has a right to know
exactly.
how these decisions were made
What information was considered.
and how taxpayer money was spent.
It's a pretty powerful statement.
It is.
It's like they're saying we deserve better
Yeah, we deserve transparency and accountability.
from our government.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear from this report
Yeah,
that there are some serious concerns about how the pandemic was handled.
definitely.
And one of the things that I keep thinking about
Yep.
is the long-term consequences.
Oh, all this.
Yeah, like what does this mean for the future?
Right, because it's not just about what happened.
Exactly.
It's about what happens next.
And one of the biggest concerns for me
Yeah.
is the erosion of trust.
In our institutions.
Yeah, like if people feel like they weren't given accurate information or that their concerns were dismissed,
Right.
it's going to be really hard to regain that trust.
Especially during the next crisis.
Exactly like what happens when the next pandemic hits.
Yeah, are people going to listen to the experts?
Are they going to trust the government?
Right, because if they don't,
Yeah,
that could be a real problem.
absolutely. It could make the situation even worse.
So how do we even begin to rebuild that trust?
That's the million-dollar question.
Does this report offer any solutions?
I mean, it doesn't give us all the answers,
Right.
but it does highlight the need for a more open and honest discussion.
About what went wrong
Yeah, like we need to acknowledge the mistakes.
and learn from them.
So what are some of the key areas that we need to address?
Well, it seems like there are a lot of intertwined issues here.
There are.
But one thing that really stands out to me
Right.
is the role of government.
In public health emergencies.
Like, how much power should the government have?
Right. Should they be able to mandate medical treatments?
That's a tough one
It is.
because you have to balance individual liberties,
With public health.
and there's no easy answer.
No, it's a complex issue.
And then there's the whole issue of science being politicized.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
This report shows how easily science can be manipulated
To fit a narrative,
and how dissenting voices can be silenced.
we need to encourage open debate,
Yeah, and critical thinking,
even when it's uncomfortable.
even when it challenges the status quo.
Exactly. Science is about questioning and exploring.
Not blindly accepting.
And that brings us back to transparency.
We need to hold our leaders accountable
Absolutely.
and demand clear explanations for their decisions.
Transparency is the foundation of trust.
And without trust,
Yeah.
we're lost.
We can't function as a society.
Well, this has been a pretty intense deep dive.
It has.
This report was packed with shocking details,
Yeah. It was a real eye-opener.
and it raises so many questions
About how the pandemic was handled.
and what we need to do differently in the future.
It definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It does.
And I hope it motivates people to get involved,
To ask questions
to demand better,
from our leaders,
and from ourselves
because we all have a role to play.
in shaping a better future.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive
into the complexities and controversies
of the pandemic response.
We hope you learned something.
And that you'll continue to explore these issues.
Stay curious, stay informed.
And keep asking those tough questions.
So on the accountability level, I agree with the Democrat minority comments about Fauci. I do not believe Fauci was the architect of hiding that this happened in a lab, or that he made COVID and that he wanted a gain-of-function research that would make it into a bioweapon, the way the Republicans seem to make it go. Matt, you believe that there is some meat on the bones of that idea. Why?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, one of the stories that I worked on was how the famed article in Nature Medicine magazine called The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2 got to be published. The scientists who put together that article, we were able to get access to their private Slack chats where you can see them early in the process talking quite candidly about how they think accidental release from a lab is a likely possibility, or at least a very serious possibility. And then they have communications with Anthony Fauci and they change their mind. And there was testimony in Congress that there was no interaction between these scientists and Dr. Fauci, and that just wasn't the case. And we were able to demonstrate that. And so that—
Were you able to demonstrate that Fauci was on a chain, or that Fauci personally spoke to them, or whatever, communicated with them?
He was on a conference call. There were indications that the paper went to him and to Francis Collins, among other folks. The scientists talked about passing it up the chain. So he was at least involved in the process. We don't know exactly how, but the idea that he wasn't involved in the process, we know, is false.
Right. I think his argument is that this isn't what he was doing. And on the clinical side, and I'll bounce this one off you, Bob, and you give me your take on it, Fauci's position is all the stuff that we authorized could never have become SARS-CoV-2. That you can argue whether you should do gain of function or not and how you define it and whether you want these grants. And Obama stopped them. Actually, it was the Trump administration where there was gain of function again. I'm sure Trump would get a pass for not knowing what was happening, even though he's at the top of the food chain. Do you believe that Fauci is accurate, Bob, when it comes to what research was funded and whether or not it could have led to what is making me sick?
Well, the exact grant that Tony's alluding to is not the virus that turned into be COVID-19. But it's not to say that the money that the NIH and USAID, State Department, DOD gave to that lab to do gain-of-function research didn't lead to the pathogen that ultimately became COVID-19. I'm of the view that the origin of COVID-19 was the gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab, which was funded highly by the United States.
All right, so now, and Matt, subject to any questions that you have, of course, this is my show, but for me, it's all about conversation, and you know more. Bob, you scared me yesterday about the virology, not just because I have long COVID, but because my doctor, Dr. Robin Rose, who you know, has been on this from jump, and it's guiding her treatments of me. I am not tan right now, and no, it's not makeup. This is my long COVID that flushes me up with histamine, and she and many others believe it's because that's what this virus was designed to do long term. What do you see in it that make you think, Bob, that somebody tried to invent something that could do this to people?
Well, clearly there's a number of things that are not consistent with natural evolution. First, and the most prominent, is the furin cleavage site, which is a unique cleavage site in this virus, which I told Mike Pompeo when it was classified at the time that was really a smoking gun, that this didn't come from nature. Because what that cleavage site does is change the orientation of the binding site of the COVID virus for its receptor. So now that it no longer likes the bat receptor, but now it is attracted to the human ACE receptor. So when one of the problems I have with Tony on all this issue is when you ask the question, does COVID-19 now that came from bats, according to his view, Does it now can it infect bats? And the answer is it's highly inefficient now in infecting bats, but it's learned how to be highly efficient to humans. And that's because of that furin cleavage site that changes the orientation.
Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.